Hello everybody, it's the Historical Gamer once again, and today we are returning to War in the Pacific, Admirals Edition, our Let's Play series against XTRG. It is February 16th, and it has been in-game, that is, and it's been a couple of weeks since our last episode, and we're going to be talking about that in a little bit more in a little while, I guess. I'll be completely honest, the series came very close to ending due to some disagreements and some discussions around some of the house rules that we have in place. But let's take a look at the turn replay first before we dive into that too much. First off, you can see here there's a Japanese submarine that just torpedoed our sub-tender, the Zeredikus, which was trying to escape from the Dutch East Indies out toward India. She took a torpedo and sank, unfortunately, so that Dutch sub-tender is a goner, and we're not going to be able to save that. I think we might have one more that's on its way toward India or something to that extent, but I'm not quite sure. That's a small subtender. It's not worth that much. The Dutch ships in general in this game are worth very little. Okay, and just in terms of victory points. All right, so our subs are launching torpedoes at enemy minesweepers, destroyer minesweepers here in the strait between Borneo and Celebes to no effect. A sub of ours is firing some torpedoes at a Japanese destroyer near Kendari. That seems like a suicidal endeavor, but torpedoes missed, and the Japanese failed to find it, so that's a good result. I mean, in the sense that, hey, at least it didn't get sunk, right? Or pounded by enemy depth charges. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it'd be nice to hit some of the Japanese ships, but again, remember, destroyers are hard to hit. Damn little things are fast. Okay, we'll fast forward through this a little bit. More destroyers shooting at destroyer minesweepers, taking some depth charges. One hit. I doubt that's any serious damage. And we're onto the air phase, so. A lot of recon going on all over the map. Some Oscars are flying a combat sweep over Chichang, or Chichang, or however you pronounce that. This is one of the events that leads to sort of the discussion around the house rules. But you can see here 10 enemy Oscars, Ki-43s, leading a sweep over this base here at 7850. Well in the rear of the Chinese front line. The Chinese front line is anywhere between 120 to 200 miles in front of where they're running a fighter sweep. Looks like there were severe storms over that base. Okay, so 10 fighters are running a sweep over Tuyun, again related to what we were discussing earlier. This is a base that is, oh boy, I don't even know. I mean, even if you say here it's 200 to 300 miles from the front lines. Into the rear. So fighters running a sweep there. Again, both those bases are unarmed. We don't have anything there, but they're running fighter sweeps for a couple of reasons that we'll dive into here in a moment. Looks like they're running fighter sweeps at 30,000 feet. Another one here coming in with 9 zeros at 20,000 feet. Meanwhile, a large Japanese air raid is occurring over the river here. I forget the name of the city here, but we had kind of wondered why he was bombing there last turn. Looks like he's bombing there again with a considerable effort of over 60 bombers here hitting this base. Pretty much tells me that he's for sure going to be making a river crossing here where we're a little bit weak. The majority of our strength is over at Changsha. We have a couple of forts, and we've got like 1,000 assault value here at this base, and it's Henyang. But you can see here he's committing substantial resources there, bombing our troops there, inflicting 246 casualties, 1 squad destroyed, 13 disabled. I think we're going to have to reevaluate our defenses along that river line because, frankly, I just don't think if he's making a serious push, if he has substantial forces to the southwest of Changsha, then we really don't have any way to stop a river crossing. We can delay it potentially if he didn't bring enough men, but we really can't stop it. That's, I think, one of my biggest frustrations in this game is that the Japanese are massively OP in China. But it is what it is, and it's something I knew getting in, so that's fine. Okay, so he's also launching large-scale air raids over Singapore. These suffer some flak damage. They get a couple of runway hits. They don't really do much damage, though. Not much in the way of heavy bombers there. Meanwhile, an additional raid of 36 bombers coming in here, 28 Sonyas and 8 Sallies. Another 134 casualties over that river there. Some Tojos running a fighter sweep over Singapore. We've got another 9 Sallies coming in. His air raids are a little bit scattered, not quite benefiting from all of the coordination benefits that he potentially could have benefited from. 8 bombers flying over Bataan. 6 more Sonyas coming in over that base. Additional aircraft over, I can't even pronounce the name of the Chinese city, sort of 200 miles in our rear of Changsha. And it looks like that part of the air phase is concluded. So we're skipping through a little bit more. This stuff's kind of blasting by quickly just because it's not super exciting to have things last forever. I got you guys in mind, you know. I try to keep you guys under consideration. Meanwhile, Japanese destroyer here is depth charging the Sailfish off the coast of Japan. Okay, no damage there. That one was just a straight-out ASW patrol, it looks like. Meanwhile, Japanese RO-67 over Wallis Island. Bottoms out. We have some ASWs there. More ASW work by the Sailfish off the northeast coast of Japan. And then Japanese cruisers continue to bombard the coast of China here. Another 138 or 387 casualties here. Quite a bit of damage to the runway, to the resources, to the heavy industry. All of this will make the city a little bit less valuable for him when he takes it over. 1,319 fires. No, China can't. I don't think anyway that China can win him the game alone. I think in order to win the game, Japan has to basically take all of China and all of India, or all of China and a big chunk or key portions of like Australia and New Zealand, I think. But I haven't run the math. Pretty certain that taking all of China will not win him the game. Most of the Chinese cities really aren't worth that much to Japan. And Japan already has like half of China conquered by the time the game starts. So, a large-scale bombardment occurring here at Changsha. I'm going to try and fast forward through this, but this is going to take a little bit of time. Just because the way the game, like, even if you fast forward, it takes a long time for this to kind of blitz through. So you can see here, we've got a large number of units here. I think we've got about 4,300 assault value here. A huge portion of our Chinese army. Not even half. I mean, maybe a quarter of our Chinese assault value strength is at Changsha. So certainly a huge portion, but not the end-all, be-all portion of the army. I know we've got like 2,000 at Nanyang. We've got like 2,000 more at Sian. I think we've got another 1,000 down here on this river crossing, and then maybe another 1,000 down this way. You can see here the bombardment was pretty effective. I mean, he inflicted 417 casualties on us, 8 squads destroyed. We lost 6 guns. He did lose 88 casualties, a squad destroyed, 8 disabled in counter-battery fire. And then a bombardment here at Wenkao, where we saw the cruiser bombardment. By the way, can you guys hear me okay over the audio? Because it looks like those numbers are kind of high up there. I hope you guys can hear me over the gameplay. I really don't want to have to re-record everything. Okay, thanks. Alright, so bombardment at Wenkao. Pretty even results there. Very favorable terrain for us at Wenkao. That really helps our defensive units sort of punch above their weight. Japanese deliberate attack here on the northeast corner of Celebes. They've taken most of the island. Most of the key points of the island have already fallen. It's more of just mop-up work for him there, but you can see he drove back a Dutch unit, 142 casualties. Units retreating inland toward another base. Meanwhile, we launched a bombardment attack to basically get some intelligence about what he has at Bataan. And the intelligence that we gleaned is pretty interesting here. So we can see here that he has 6 units, but he's actually subdivided these 3 divisions into sub-units. I'm assuming he's done that in the intent of sort of fooling me to say that these 2 divisions are in fact 6 or 6 units. But what we can really tell here is he has a total of 2 infantry divisions attempting to bottle up a much larger force at Bataan. And so if we really wanted to, we could probably counterattack at Bataan and drive him back to Clark Field. Now, I'm not confident here that if he has 900 assault value and we attack with 1900, I'm not confident that, even though I'm confident we would win at Bataan, I'm not confident that we could then drive toward Clark Field and take Clark Field. So I think the question of whether it makes sense for us to launch an attack at Bataan really comes down to this. What do we hope to accomplish? If we counterattack and we can inflict some casualties, yes, but we'd probably burn several thousand supply up in a place that we don't have any way of getting more supply. If we can move forward and take Clark Field and potentially threaten to retake the majority of the island of Luzon, then perhaps it is worth it, because it would then require a substantial diversion of forces and resources back to Luzon to cap us and drive us back to Bataan and eventually defeat us. He will defeat us on Luzon at some point in time, no matter what. The question becomes if we think we can, take Clark Field, because I think if we can take Clark Field, then we can probably cause him to panic to some extent and to divert large numbers of reinforcements into his holdings here. However, if we can't take Clark Field, then we might be better off just staying back in Bataan and sort of chewing on our biscuits and salted pork and hardtack and hanging out there till April or so when we're forced to surrender. I'm confident, again, that we can win at Bataan. It's just a question of what is the cost worth the benefit, and driving him out of Bataan by itself doesn't really accomplish a whole lot. So I mean, I'm sure he doesn't have much more than a division on the rest of the island, because otherwise he probably would have it at Bataan. He's clearly diverted a large number of his forces away from the Philippines toward other targets, and so I love the idea of throwing a huge wrench into his plans by, driving him back. I'm just not confident in my ability to really impact anything. Meanwhile, you can see the bombardment was surprisingly very effective. Out of his 2 divisions, he lost 40 squads disabled due to the bombardment. We only lost 5 men, 1 gun. So it was a very lopsided bombardment. The good news is the bombardment doesn't eat a lot of supply. I think we probably use about 1,000 supply in the bombardment. So maybe we continue the bombardment next turn as well, just to see what happens. But not sure. Meanwhile, shock attack against the Japanese 58th Infantry Regiment here near Sinyang. 4 corps of ours, almost 1,000 assault value here attacking this Japanese regiment, driving it back towards Sinyang. We had 5-to-1 assault. We had 5-to-1 odds here north of Sinyang. We inflicted 2,081 casualties on the Japanese. 18 squads, combat squads destroyed, 17 non-combatants, 12 guns, and the unit retreated. So we ripped that regiment apart pretty good with our troops there. We lost about 17 squads of our own, but still not a bad result at all. Japanese shock attack at Chinkang. So you see here the 2nd Raiding Regiment launched a shock attack here in the rear of our forces. About 300 miles, at least. Is that charitable? 40, 80, 120, 160, 200. Okay, so 200 miles and 2 river lines behind the lines. He dropped a regiment of paratroopers, a partial regiment of paratroopers, that's important to note, the 2nd Raiding Regiment, the 1st segment of the 2nd Raiding Regiment. 200 miles behind enemy lines, he took a city of like 50,000 plus with 700 soldiers and 3 guns. Not something that I would consider plausible, even remotely, but that is something that we will discuss in a moment. Likewise, at Tuyun, another paratrooper unit dropped here, equally, actually maybe even further behind the lines. This one isn't even a traditional paratrooper unit. This is Japanese Marines, the SNLF force. Just 248 men, another fragment, taking a city, again, of like 50,000 plus, with a fragment unit. Granted, it's more than the 1 or 2 squads that, like, one of the house rules specifically calls out, but it's still a fragment unit taking a major Chinese city 200 plus miles behind the lines. No feasible way to supply or reinforce or anything like that. And yes, there are some airborne capable SNLF forces. This is one of them. The Japanese definitely did not use them in paratrooper roles in China. We'll discuss this in a little bit more. I guess the question I would have is it the only SNLF paratrooper unit? Or do they have multiple? The Raider Regiment's definitely a para unit, but that's an Army unit. It is the only SNLF force. Okay. All right. So first things first, before we jump into the rest of the turn, let's take a look at the issue at hand. The Japanese have taken two major Chinese cities, one of them along a railway line directly along toward the Chinese capital of Chongqing, much further in the rear. You can see here the city of Tuyan is well in the rear of our front line. Our front line is along this river line here, based at the city of Changsha, the city of Henyang, the city of Luchao. These cities were ungarrisoned, which, obviously that is potentially a question to say, like, hey, how unrealistic is it to drop paratroopers into a city that has no troops in it? Well, maybe, kind of, sort of, but here's the house rule that we had in place. We have a house rule for invasions, land combat. It says no sub-invasions. Okay, that's not relevant. No airdropping of one squad via airdrop. Is one or two squads, I think, is actually the way we wrote it. Which, okay, this wasn't one or two squads. It was 10 squads at Tuyan, and I think it was like 20 over at Chikang. Only allowed landings and invasions at dot and hex base is not relevant. Uses of portions of paratrooper units to seize hexes. So no use of portions of paratroop units to seize hexes. So we have again, that's part of this house rule. There's a sentence in the house rule that says you are not allowed to use portions of paratroop units to seize hexes. You are not allowed to use fragments to cut off retreat. Units blocking retreat must be realistic sizes, brigades or above. Only airdrop a unit on a target if it has at least 40 preparation points on the target it is dropped on. And then there's a question mark around, like, no gamey tactics. So I think, again, what really brought this all about is that if you say you're going to drop a regiment of troops 200 plus lines behind enemy lines with no base or realistic place to go to, I think that's a little bit unrealistic. This is a little bit gamey. Neither of these units are the size of a brigade. We are attempting to, in my opinion, taking Chikang and Tuyan does block lines of retreat. So in theory, I think the way that XTRG, and we discussed this, but the way that XTRG read this was that you can't drop a paratrooper unit into a hex directly behind the enemy that then completely leaves them cut off. In other words, you can't use a paratrooper unit to close the last line of retreat. So if he had dropped paratrooper units entirely around this base, for example, that would not be allowed because then the unit there would have nowhere to retreat. From his point of view, these troops are so far in the rear that these guys can retreat any number of directions. But of course, they're also positioned along the two major roadways that feed the Changsha front. There is a rail line to the west toward Quilan, so it's not the only supply point. But actually, because he drops a Tuyan, the only supply that can get to the entire Changsha front either has to come from Yichang, which has nowhere to draw supply from because there's Japanese troops blocking it, has to come through the mountains, which isn't really a supply route, or it has to come down this little dirt road down here into Quilan and then to the east over here. So in theory, yes, the units don't completely cut the enemy off and they don't completely block the enemy's ability to retreat, but in my view, he's clearly cutting off the line of retreat. And so we even had this sort of philosophical debate on what retreat means. XTRG's point of view is that retreat just means the physical ability to retreat to any given hex. From my point of view, I mean, this is clearly cutting off supply and effective ability to retreat because of his locations of these troops. So at this point, there are railways. That's what these little dotted things represent here. These are railways, whereas I think they're railways anyway. They might technically be like highways, but I'm pretty sure they're railways. You can strat move along them. These guys are major roads, and these guys are minor roads. But in any event, dropping troops 200 miles behind enemy lines, dropping a portion of a unit, not an entire unit, and, in my opinion, cutting off the line of retreat. The real kicker, I think, is that even if we agree that XTRG's interpretation of retreat is correct, XTRG also admitted that his units did not have 40 preparation points for the drop. I believe he said one of them had 24 and one of them had 7 or something along those lines, which basically means that he dropped 20 days earlier than he was allowed to drop based on our house rule. Chongqing, meanwhile, we had a unit here in Chongqing, the 96th Chinese Division, for example, that is actually on the way to Qikang, which is one of the bases that he took. I had them on the way here. If I had been given 20 more days, they would have arrived. And that paired drop would have been suicidal. So in any event, we had a pretty long discussion. The series almost ended over this, because even if you give XTRG's reading of the rules entire preference over my own, he admitted to violating the political point version of the rule. So that's why we haven't had a turn for the last 20 days or so. XTRG is of the opinion that you can't abide by these house rules because it makes paratrooper units basically neutered, because Japan doesn't have any paratrooper units above a brigade. It doesn't have enough transport aircraft effectively to drop entire units, although I think he probably could have dropped the entire Raider Regiment if he hadn't also dropped the SNLF Regiment. So I'm not sure that's entirely true. But I guess his point of view is he wants to use paratroopers, and he doesn't think rules should prevent him from using paratroopers. Anyway, so that is where we ended up, and that was sort of the discussion. And this is obviously my side of the story. XTRG has a very different opinion on all of this outside of the political point preparation. Sorry, the preparation points, which he admitted he didn't follow. I think if we're going to change house rules and not follow them, we can't just take advantage of it and then say we should change them. We should agree to change them before. In any event, we have agreed upon some new house rules that will allow him to use paratroopers moving forward. I don't have the write-up in front of me. I'd have to get it. We're finalizing some of the verbiage. And we didn't really want to do a revert because that would have been moving back like 2 or 3 turns. And it basically came down to, hey, this series can either end or we can progress, and that's kind of where we went. With that being said, that's the situation right now. That's that's where we're at, and he has taken these 2 major cities, which now effectively cut off the majority of my supply. I do have this one roadway here east toward Changsha, but it cuts off the majority of my supply to my entire front line. And should I have garrisoned these cities? Maybe, but if I had understood the house rules to be what XTRG did, then obviously I would have garrisoned them. I didn't garrison them because I thought the action that he took was specifically prohibited. And so that's the reality of the situation. And so clearly the fragment rule and the preparation point rule were unquestionably violated, but it is what it is, and that's where we're at. With that being said, that's the situation right now in China. And honestly, I think the only effective thing that I can do is to pull my entire front line back, all the way back to Qikang, and try and overwhelm these troops here before I run out of supply and crush them there. So I'm going to have to evacuate all of these cities along the Changsha front in order to try and get back here before he launches his offensive across the river and crushes me. Because as we already can tell, he's bombarding Hinyang very heavily. He intends to cross the river here and hit us, probably racing towards Saoyang to cut off the retreat of my Changsha forces, who could, again, retreat to the north to Chengthe. But I am going to essentially abandon the entire front line here because of this issue. I don't think I'm going to abandon the line at Quilan or at Luchao or Nanning. I think I will probably just try and move some forces up to retake Tuyan. An SNLF force is a much weaker unit there at Tuyan. And so if I bring a corps on top of it, I should be able to take it. We have agreed that Japan will not do any paradrop attacks on any non-base or dot hex. So XTRG agrees that would be very gamey. If he was to just drop them on an empty roadway, that would be a little bit unfair. So at least we agree with that. But with this being said, That's the situation in China. Now, I do have one thing that I didn't realize at the time of Wet'suwet'en. Nothing. Not really anything. We do have the 60th Chinese B Corps, which is 108 assault value here. It is going to move forward to Tuyan and try and crush the SNLF force. I don't know if 108 assault value is going to be enough. These guys were like level 3 fort bases, too. That's the other thing is where he took them, he's going to have substantial benefits on the defensive. And so I'm not going to lie. I was very upset with the way that this went down. I did feel misled. I don't think XTRG tried to do anything intentionally shifty, but it was deeply upsetting. And again, the series came very close to losing or to ending over this. With that being said, so what we're going to do is we're going to bring the 60th down to Tuyan. They'll kind of probe out the SNLF force. We're also going to bring some additional troops north. Probably the 52nd. Is that who I'm moving? Yeah, I might as well move them. I think I had another corps that I was moving on Tuyan as well. But we're gonna converge with probably 300 assault value at Tuyan and maybe 400 assault value at Chikang, because this is a raider regiment, so it's a little bit stronger. Additionally, I'm gonna pull all of my troops off this river line and retreat into the mountains here at Chikang and Tuyan. And begin the eventual retreat back to Chongqing, because I think one of the things, and this has nothing to do with XTRG, but one of the things that really bothers me with War in the Pacific is the modeling of the China front is so fucking botched. Japan had no chance realistically to drive this far into China. They just didn't. The logistics of their ability to drive into the heartland of China, they were basically at the end of their logistical train by mid-1940 in China. And so their ability to push further into China while also conducting operations in the Pacific was basically non-existent. They essentially had to make a choice of whether they wanted to continue fighting in China or whether they wanted to fight in the Pacific. Japan simply did not have the ability. It's one of those things where people like to talk about how like the nationalists were defeated, and they were along the coast, but there were still a lot of Chinese troops in the heartland. There was very defensible terrain. The Japanese never seriously threatened China. And so, War in the Pacific, for all of its greatness that I really enjoy, does a pretty shitty job of modeling the China front in terms of land combat. And it substantially underappreciates the strength of the nationalist forces, which were not nearly as weak as the game portrays them to be. But anyway, that's enough of me bitching. So that is the situation in China. We are evacuating our front line because of these para units in the east. In the west, we'll keep them kind of in place and try and converge. Tuyan is a little bit easier to reach. Again, it's only 80 miles from our nearest corps. Chikang is much more difficult. It's in the mountains. It's on the other end of a river. It's a little bit more remote, a little bit more difficult to hit, but we are going to try and consolidate that. With that being said, so one of the other things that we did, that I did discover here is that I do have these hurricane units which moved into Chongqing. They can reach Tuyan flying with a cap. They have a range of 6 flying with drop tanks at normal radius, so they can do a long-range cap over Tuyan, where he dropped his SNLF force. We also have some 21 flying Tigers, likewise flying out of Chongqing. They can reach Chikang, or however you pronounce that, where he dropped his Raider Regiment. Now, one of the other agreements that we came to that XTRG has agreed to is that he will not paradrop any units without paradropping the whole unit. So this idea of violating the portions unit, his opinion is that as long as he sends the entire unit over multiple days, that's fine, even if he can't send them all in one day. So what that does mean is over the next day or two, he's going to have to continue dropping paratroopers over both Tuyan and over Chikang. And so we should be able to get our fighters out over both of these bases and try and see if we can intercept the other elements of his troops. So with that being said, we should be able to hopefully force some air battles that maybe we'll have some advantage over. We'll be flying at long range. We'll be flying with drop tanks over Tuyan, 32 Hurricanes against whatever he flies out in cap, and then we'll have about 21 of the P-40s. I'm kind of debating, and I guess I'd be interested to hear your guys' opinion. Rather than flying the P-40s out over Chikang, do you think we should consolidate over Tuyan so we can overwhelm at least one of his fighter units and ravage one of his units that's coming down with paratroopers, or should we go for splitting between both of these and trying to grab a prize at both? Just one of them like a G-Man? Anybody else have any opinions on that? The problem is the eastern city I can't reach, I don't think. Or maybe I can. I think the problem is the eastern city. He's already got like 70 squads at Chikang, so the bulk of his troops are already on the ground. He only has like 200 men at Tuyan, so I'm assuming there will be more transports that we can hit at Tuyan. And it's a little bit further away from his air bases, so the likelihood is he'd just have zeros. I don't think the Oscars can reach Tuyan. This is versus a human. The game is both AI and PvP. I don't know if the pairs will be disrupted. I mean, I'm hoping to kill him in the saddle. I remember when I was playing Belugan, he tried to do I think it was a paradrop of a unit somewhere in Burma, and I caught. Apparently, he didn't send adequate escorts or something like that, and I shot down 40 of his of his transport aircraft and wiped out like an entire unit in the air. I agree, Charcoal, but the issue is flying cap over Chikang won't open anything up. I think I'm just hoping. So if we go here, they're at 5. They have to be at normal radius. So the P-40s can only fly over Chikang. They can't fly over Tuyan. So if I consolidate, I have to send everything over Chikang. And we have to let the SNLF boys land unmolested. Yeah, I guess I'll keep my max law. I just can't. I only have 600 strength along this river line here at Henyang. I can't hold the line. There's just no feasible way for me to hold that line, I don't think. I'm pulling the base force out to move north. What's the fortification setup look like here? Level 3 forts. Yeah, it is annoying. I should be able to drop troops right here via rail. I mean, there's a lot of issues with land combat in this game. Meanwhile, one other thing worth calling out is at Nanyang, we drove the enemy regiment out here towards Xinyang. But my offensive on Xinyang is probably going to have to take a pause because we can see here there's enemy troops here that are advancing out of Loyang to the west, probably toward Nanyang. They're going to threaten the rear of these 800 or 700 assault value troops that we just fought that Japanese regiment. So these guys are going to have to fall back on Nanyang, otherwise they're going to get cut off from the Japanese. We do have one corps that's blocking the way, but if it's any sort of substantial Japanese force, these guys aren't going to be much use in holding him back. They might delay it in like a day or two. Probably he'll get there, and then maybe delay a day when he kind of feels him out with a bombardment to see what's there. So we might get 2 days to kind of move these troops back toward Nanyang. But we're going to have to pull these 800 assault value troops back toward Nanyang. So that's the situation in China. Not a lot really else happened on this particular turn. That was kind of the big deal. He's consolidating or driving north on the Dutch East Indies. He put troops at Pantar. He put troops at Nellore, north of Timor. He landed or made some further advances on Celebes. He's taken Balikpapan. Our troops at Samardia are still okay. The troop transport Zeeman is now out of fuel, and she's going to die. God damn it. Let's move you here. That's Sandakan. Apparently, I kept it on flank speed without realizing it. So he's going to be like 4 days to get here just to get more fuel. Which means we probably ended our supply runs into Bataan because he's going to take a lot of system damage. It is kind of charcoal, but if he takes China and India, he wins the game regardless of what happens at sea pretty much. So that's, I think, one of the frustrations. Is like I would rather just play quiet China and not even play China if there are not rules put in place to at least bring things into alignment a little bit more. So our troops here launched those bombardment attacks. They didn't actually even use 1,000 supply. They still have over 32,000 supplies. So I think we'll continue the bombardments of the Japanese troops there again. Looks like he's got 4 units and 8,300 troops at Clark Field, according to our recon. Another 6,800 north at Linyang. Another unit at Manila. So I really am I'm leaning against launching further assaults against his troops in Bataan, but we'll at least launch another bombardment. Dutch troops at Aden. Where is Aden anyway? Oh, those guys. They're not damaged. Apparently they're running without fuel to Aden. So we've got, not these guys, we've got, these guys are not taking any damage as they slowly move toward Aden, which is good. Off-map ships apparently, when they're out of fuel, don't take damage. I think we have a house rule banning submarine supply routes for the Allies at this point, but I'd have to double check. Yeah, Kushin, I mean, that would kind of remove the purpose of having China in the game. I can understand why a Japanese player might want China involved. I'm not opposed to China being in the game. I just think the way that it's modeled is problematic if you don't have some rules in place to protect it. Because the idea, essentially the best strategy, if you're China, is to turtle and to withdraw into the mountains. So like withdraw into Quyang or withdraw up towards Sian and make your stand there. The Japanese can consolidate so much to such a degree that they can still probably overwhelm you. Good Chinese players might be able to do better, but generally speaking, the rule is retreat into the mountains and you have no hope in any kind of battles. And that's kind of, it's like, what's the point of having it in the theater if you have no chance? I'm sure a Japanese player would say, well, the Japanese have no chance in 44 and 45, so why play then? But it becomes a different game at that point of the game. Yeah, 270 men taking a city 50,000 plus is pretty funny. I was telling XTRG, it's like, dude, the freaking police force would probably arrest you. Anyway. Okay, so we're unloading some equipment in Auckland. I don't really have a lot else to show on this turn, and please don't go complain or anything to XTRG. I was venting a little bit on the stream. We came to an amenable solution and how to move forward with this. I think what I was just sort of conveying was my own point of view on how that all unfolded. But I don't think any of it was done maliciously or anything like that. I think it was just a genuine, for the majority of those cases, I think it was a genuine misunderstanding of the rules and what they meant. And I think for the one exception is probably the 40 pp rule, which we are amending down so that it doesn't take a month and a half, essentially, to launch a paratrooper attack. So I do think that's fair to say that's probably too much time. But I also think, you need some preparation. I don't think it's realistic that, just because the city is empty, we can paradrop the next day, as if there's no preparation required to put troops on a plane and fly them somewhere and drop them. Like, those types of operations take a little bit of time to plan. So we're going to revise that down, and I think in our next video, I'll probably go over what the actual changes are to the house rules. But I think the big question for this turn is going to be what happens with our fighter sweeps over Tuyan and over Chikang. Can we catch any of the Japanese troops on board? And then how quickly can we clear Tuyan? And then also what can we get to Chikang quickly and efficiently to try and save things there or change things there. Our carriers here are working their way toward Perth. The Hermes is just a couple of days away. The Indomitable is just a few days behind that with the Royal Sovereign. And so the British fleet there is potentially out of damage or out of risk. The Sumatra, meanwhile, is out of the repair yards. It is trying to move toward Perth slowly. It doesn't have enough fuel to get there. So I'm probably going to have to send a couple of units here to give it some supplies via mid underway replenishment. I was going to do it with these heavy cruisers, but maybe I shouldn't do it with heavy cruisers. That feels like an unnecessary risk to put the Chicago out there. So maybe we'll just send a light cruiser and a destroyer to kind of help share fuel, because they really just need to get them to another base over there. I think we will go ahead and have these guys continue to stay here, and they'll remain on station, just in the event that the Japanese try and send another light force our way. But we'll send these light cruisers over here to merge or to meet the patrol over here, which I think is actually in range of his aircraft on Timor, which is why I'm only sending a smaller force that way. Charcoal, he had recon over the city. That's why he knew there were no troops there. He did do some reconnaissance. It's not like he just flat out dropped him in. He knew there was no one there. Which, again, from my point of view, China is so under strength in this game that leaving large numbers of troops behind to garrison cities is a pretty unfair penalty to the Chinese. If the city doesn't require a garrison, I don't think you necessarily should leave troops behind. China doesn't have small units. China has a handful of base units, which have a little bit of AV. And then other than that, all of their units are full-blown corps. And so, they get shot up, they lose a lot of casualties, but if you leave those troops behind, you're in trouble. What did I just click on? Oh yeah, these guys over here. But if you leave, if I'm required to leave entire fragments of corps in each one of these cities, it's a little bit laughable and unrealistic. Additionally, you shouldn't have to leave garrison troops in your own city that is loyal to your own government. The troops don't, it's not Japan occupying China. It's not hostile citizenry. They're largely on my side, either the communists or the nationals, depending on the city. And so it shouldn't necessarily require that. And yeah, okay, theoretically you could pair-drop troops in, but if it's a city of 500,000 or 1 million or something like that, the idea of 200 or 300 armed Japanese troops with no heavy equipment being able to subdue that population that's already waging a guerrilla war against the Japanese in the east of China. And the game really doesn't model the guerrilla warfare either. Historically, Japan had a very tenuous hold on its Chinese holdings. They were never remotely close to being able to annex the portions of China that they controlled, because all they controlled was the cities where they had large garrisons of troops and a few occasional fortified roadways and supply lines. But the bulk of the countryside was not under Japanese control. And so that's another one of those reasons they struggled to drive further into China. There are Chinese troops. They don't look different than the nationalists. So, if you go up to Yan'an, there's a red Chinese division up here. It's the 115th Red Chinese under Lin Bao. You see the Chinese or the Chinese flag or the PRC flag. The game assumes a united front against the Japanese. which is kind of true and kind of not. China was complicated. There might be a difference in the pools of troops that get pulled forward, but there are Chinese troops, or Japanese, or whatever, communist. I think that's probably going to do it for this episode, guys. Unless there's anything else specifically you wanted to see. If we look at the intelligence report, he lost 8 operational units, 3 to flak, so 11 aircraft. We lost 2 operational. Nothing to flak that turn. Ship availability. We go down here. We can see the Hornet is 22 days away. That's our next fleet carrier that we get. We've got a bunch of merchants coming up in the next couple of days. We get our first anti-aircraft light cruiser, the Van Hemscherk, which will arrive in Mombasa off the map. I think it's a Dutch anti-aircraft cruiser. We get a corvette in Victoria in Canada, a tanker Norfold in Abadan. The destroyer Hotspur with Captain Horatio Hornblower commanding will come in 6 days at Aden. Some S-boats in a little bit over a week. And the Vincennes also comes in with the Hornet. Yeah. So that's the situation right now. U.S. carriers are in theater. They're in a classified location, being moved to a classified location. So they're in the South Pacific right now. I'll say that. I have some plans for them, but it's a little bit of a spoiler, so check back in a month and I'll tell you what my plans are with my carrier. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this episode up here, and we'll pick up next time. Until next time, this is the Historical Gamer saying, as always, thank you once again for watching, and until next time, I'm out.